You know when you're out camping and you're sitting around the fire and everyone's just chatting and you chat for so long and it's so fun that by the time you're finished, the fire has completely gone out. If you want to have more of those type of conversations, there are 6 mistakes that you're going to have to stop making. The good news is that fixing these is essentially just knowledge. There's no like kind of skill or mindset involved. So you get a break from me saying you need to change your mindset, and also it should be pretty quick and easy to fix. It's just more effort. Those 6 mistakes are ending the conversation too early, not ending the conversation early enough, not restarting the conversation frequently enough, assuming people don't want to talk too often, talking about what you think people want to talk about rather than what you want to talk about, and finally, letting conversations end too early because you think you're talking too much or you think you're asking too many questions. So when it comes to the first one, which is letting conversations end too early, I used to be terrible at this. Like, I would assume that people didn't want to talk, or that every time there was a silence of any kind, not even awkward, just any kind of silence, I would assume, oh God, this person doesn't want to talk to me, I better shut up so I don't annoy them. And so if you imagine it like surfing, you're probably wondering why I had this here. If you imagine it like surfing, you're getting off the wave when, you know, you're not even close to the shore yet. Now, I'm not much of a surfer, even though I'm an Aussie. I was more of a boogie boarder or bodyboarder as a kid. But what I do know is that there's little bumps in the wave, and you know, it's not always going to be easy to stay on. Sometimes you have to ride with it a little bit. And if every time there's like a slight bump or a slight hiccup, you just jump overboard, you go, nah, I'm out, you're not going to get very far. So you have to ride these bumps, go through them, and adjust accordingly. So, you know, you adjust your surfboard a little and you keep riding it. And that's what you do in conversations too. Every time there's a little silence or a little bump, doesn't mean the other person doesn't want to keep talking. It means you just adjust a little and you keep going. Now, I do want to quickly say, don't just take my word for this. This is something you have to feel out for yourself. It's like I'm giving you a pair of shoes, you know? I'm like, here, try this on for size. You don't immediately go, oh, thank you, and go buy those shoes. No. You try them on, maybe you go half a size up or half a size down. The point is you don't just take exactly what I'm saying. And if you do decide, okay, this seems like good advice, I'm gonna try it on, I'm gonna try it out, it's not gonna feel natural straight away. You've got to break the shoes in. So, you know, just tailor this, take it all with a grain of salt is what I'm trying to say. If you do this, if you ride it all the way into the shore, it's going to be harder to get back out to ride the next wave. In other words, it's going to be harder to restart the conversation because you've fully driven it into the ground. And it's also not going to be very fun. The other person isn't going to want to talk to you much. It's not something you want to do. So how do we find the midpoint between these two extremes? Ride it as long as it feels fun. And when there's bumps and stuff, you can adjust for that. But when you keep hitting a series of bumps, that probably means you're getting pretty close to the shore. Now, when you do hit the shore though, or you know, you get to the end of your wave, what you should do is you can maybe talk to someone else, but you're going to be restarting the conversation with that person. You're not going to ride one wave when you're surfing and go, you know what, that's cool, we'll call it a day there and then go home. You're not going to become a very good surfer if you do that. You're not going to become a very good conversationalist either, and you're not going to make many friends. You have to have multiple conversations with people, ideally in one kind of social event. So that doesn't mean back to back. That's not even really restarting the conversation. That's just continuing the one that's already going. You know, you might talk to someone else. You may just sit in silence for a little bit. You may do an activity, but you come back and you talk to that person again. You paddle out on the surfboard and you get back to the start. And this brings us on to point number 3, which is not restarting conversations early enough. Now, if you don't do this, if you don't restart, you ride one wave and you just go home, you're not going to connect with people, as I've said. Now, how do you know how much to do this or how frequently to do it? If it feels natural to go up and talk to that person again, go for it. And you basically keep going until you get too tired. So just like you're surfing, if you get tired after a long day, then you go home. If the waves start to get a bit rough, you know, you get tossed off one too many waves, then maybe go home. So that's maybe if the other person isn't responding very well. So rough waves are kind of like if the other person's getting a bit, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Now, maybe the waves are getting too smooth, they're just a bit boring. In other words, the other person just being a little bit dry. Then maybe you want to go home as well. But you wait until one of these things happen. If the waves are perfectly fine and you feel great, keep restarting the conversations, keep talking to that person. So I used to have a problem where I wouldn't really restart conversations because I'd be like, that person probably thought I was so awkward in that conversation just then. I don't want to go back over to them because they'll be like, oh, this weirdo again. So I stayed away from anyone I'd talk to. And by the end of a social event, I'd essentially run out of people to talk to. And I was left with what I thought was a room full of people who are like, oh, that's some awkward guy over there. So in other words, I didn't make any friends and I didn't think anyone wanted to be friends. But no one wanted to be friends because I didn't restart these conversations. Other people weren't really thinking as negatively of me as they wanted. And even if I had made a bad first impression, there's always a second chance for a second impression, or there's no second chance for a first impression, but there's a first chance for a second impression, right? So obviously if the waves start getting rough, if you go back out there and then it's like, oh, whoa, maybe chill out. But if you go back out and the waves are great, keep going. You want to test it though. You don't want to go, oh, the next wave's probably going to be rough. In other words, thinking, oh, I don't want to go back out. They probably think I'm awkward. You go back out and you test it. And if you don't test, as my grade 1 primary school teacher would say, you'll never ever know if you never have a go. Mistake number 4 is thinking that people don't want to talk to you too much. So I put this over here on the shore. I couldn't be bothered drawing a nice shoreline, so it's a box, but pretend it's a nice shoreline with a beach. If you're standing out here on the shore looking out at the waves, you're judging like, okay, do these waves look too rough? Do they look too boring? Or do they look nice? In other words, you're thinking, do these people want to talk to me? And often, there's no real way of knowing how good the waves are. You've just got to get out there and surf them. It's the same with people. Sometimes people are clearly engrossed in their work. They got the AirPods in there typing away on their laptop or whatever. Maybe don't go and talk to them then. But generally at most things where you're with other people, people want to talk. More than you think anyway. And you've got to try it out. If you go out there and you think the waves look, I don't know, they look okay. You go out and you tested it out and the waves are a bit too smooth or a bit too rough. All good, at least you knew, at least you tried, at least you didn't rock up to the beach and go, nah, these waves look boring, I'm gonna go home. That would be a pretty sorry way to live and you wouldn't get very good at surfing. I used to make this mistake a lot. I was scared to just go up and ask, just to start a conversation, and it led to me not having anywhere near the amount of conversations I have now. If you do it in a respectful way and you smile and everything, people aren't going to hate you if they're just a bit locked in and you come up and chat. In fact, they'll be probably a bit happy that someone came and talked to them, and they'll feel kind of appreciated, even if they didn't want to chat right now. And maybe the next day or the next time they see you, they'll come up and chat to you because now they feel like talking and you're a kind of familiar face, you've expressed your interest. Mistake number 5 is talking about topics you think other people want to talk about rather than the ones you want to talk about. So you might go, I don't know, how was your weekend? And they say something about like something you have no interest in. You might be interested in like following up on that. Or, maybe you heard there was a sports game on the weekend. You have very little interest in sport, but you heard about it. So you might be like, oh, did you watch the game? You may think this is an alright thing to do because you're trying to find other people's interests. But in conversation, we're not trying to find things other people are interested in. We're trying to find things we're both interested in. So you want to always just ask about stuff you're interested in. Ask questions about stuff that you were like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. It's just the most interesting things. If you have absolutely no interest in anything they said, just pick the most interesting thing, You can't always be super interested in what they're saying. But you don't want to assume, oh, this person wants to talk about that, so I'll talk about that. You're not going to be able to have a good conversation because you're not going to care. So you're not going to be able to ask good questions. The conversation's going to go very short. So the analogy here is kind of like, imagine you're surfing and you see some pretty ladies standing on the shore over here and you're like, oh, I should do this trick. I bet they'll like that trick. And then you do the trick, you don't do it that well, and you look over at the ladies. And basically what they see is they see some guy doing a trick not that well and then looking at them as if for approval. I don't know about you guys, but if I was a lady, I wouldn't exactly be swooning in attraction. What I would maybe be attracted to, on the other hand, was if some guy just wasn't even looking at me and he was just doing the sickest waves that he honestly wanted to do. Then afterwards he was like, oh, hey ladies, So talk about the stuff you want to talk about because you'll actually execute it well. In other words, you'll actually be interested in what they're saying. You'll be able to ask good questions. Pick the stuff that you're interested in from what they've said and talk about that. And sure, if these ladies on the shore request a trick, do the trick. Just like in conversation, if someone asks you a question about something, you can still answer that question. It's not like you have to only talk about stuff that you're interested in. No, you do go out of that a little bit, but you don't deliberately go, oh, I think they're gonna like this, I'm gonna talk about that. And the last mistake number 6, is letting conversations end because you think you're asking too many questions or you think you're just talking too much. Now, this is where this surfing analogy, I couldn't think of anything that would work. So imagine you're at war, you're in the trenches, you're over on this side, you're here, and the opponents are over here in their trench. Now, my mistake used to be thinking, oh no, I'm asking too many questions in a row, I better stop talking. And then the conversation might end. Or maybe I'd just say I'd say a story and I'd be like, oh no, this is too long, and I'd just abruptly cut it off, even though the other person was interested. What you want to do instead is let it flow naturally. So there's no such thing as too many questions or, too long of a story, as long as the other person is interested. So let's take this to the war emoji. Emoji. Let's take this to the war analogy. So the safe thing to do, if you want to default to this, is just to, let's say you're this guy. You want to kind of hide in your trench. Now, this person is going to start firing at you. You're hiding there. When they're firing, you'll go, okay, the gun's fire is coming from over there. You have a little peek out and you're like, oh yeah, over there, I see one, right? You work out where they are. And once you've done that, then you get up and you start shooting. So in conversation, it's okay to the safe thing to do is to just ask questions first. You work out what they're interested in, what they want to talk about right now through asking questions. And then you get out and you start firing at them because once you know where they are, in other words, you start talking, you start sharing stories because you know what they want to talk about. You know the vibe of the conversation. And the other benefit of kind of letting them go first is they'll fire a bunch. They'll go like, oh, I've used a bunch of ammo. You know what? It's time to let them fire. I'm going to duck down. And now it's your turn. So they'll let you go. And they'll be happy that they just get to fire at the start because they then don't have to worry about getting shot at, right? So they're chill with that. They like that. So people like it when people ask questions to us. It makes them feel like important and everything. They feel good. And then after a while though, they would be like, okay, time to turn it around. So slight tangent, I was playing soccer the other day and I kept like passing the ball to people because the week before I was a bit of a ball hog. I'm sorry to be that guy. But I was just passing to other people, and after a while, I started to build a connection with some of the players because this is only our second week. And our bond started to deepen. And after that, people started passing more back to me. So people were like, oh, Ivo, I love that guy. I'm going to pass to him. Now, if I hadn't passed to them initially, they'd be like, oh, that guy never passes to me. I'm not going to pass to him, right? So the safe thing to do is also always just to spam questions at the start. In other words, to hide in the trenches. Now, if you feel like it though, it is perfectly acceptable to just, as soon as you get in, start your shift, just open up and start firing back. Maybe even lob a couple grenades over. It's fully up to you. But you want to stop as soon as they resist. So if you're doing that and then they go, ah, and they start firing back at you, maybe now it's your time to duck down, right? So if you start talking and then they start talking, maybe start asking questions back. If they're fine with you talking and they ask questions, let it flow. Again, the thing here is to just let it flow. And sometimes it will be pretty even, you'll duck up and shoot for a bit, you'll duck down, they'll shoot. It'll go back and forth in a relatively, 50-50 way. But it doesn't always have to go like that. The point here is you're letting it flow. You're not trying to balance it 50-50 all the time. If it feels natural to fire more or to ask more or to yap more, go for it. If it feels natural to hide in the trenches or just ask questions, go for it. Now, if you're firing at them and you're chucking grenades and you're shooting and you just get absolutely no response from them, it's probably an empty trench. This person is probably run down. So if you're talking a lot and you're not really getting any feedback, you're not getting any good responses, they don't care and you need to shut up. Conversely, if you're hiding too much and they stop firing, so you're asking questions and they stop talking, now it's time to talk, right? Because they feel, okay, now it's your turn. So you just let it kind of flow like that. That's how you know if you're doing too much or too little, is when they either stop talking or they haven't talked for a while. And don't just ask questions, use statements as well. So this is a way of kind of listening and getting them to talk more. You might go, oh, interesting. Or you might go, you seem very passionate about this. I tend to go towards the side of using slightly longer sentences rather than just, oh, cool. I might go, wow, that's so interesting. You seem really passionate about this. A bit of a longer sentence shows more interest, if you ask me. So you're finding ways to show interest, and you may also make comments as well. And sometimes you give your opinion, but it depends. You wouldn't really want to give your opinion about the other person, about something they've done. It might be, if it's a light-hearted thing they've done, sure, or if it's about another person they're talking about in a light-hearted way. But so that's for opinions. When it comes to giving statements, so you can kind of do statement questions. So if they say like, oh, I got stung by a bee, you can be like, oh, wow, I heard that hurt a lot. Or like, wow, I bet that hurt. It's essentially a question, but it hasn't been said like, did that hurt? Because when you just spam questions like that, like, did it hurt? It comes across a bit job interviewy. So just switch it up a little bit and make sure you're actually showing interest when you say these questions. You know, using facial expression, doing like the slow nodding, not interrupting them too much, because that way it comes across as, okay, I actually care about what you're saying. I'm not just trying to ask questions just to continue the conversation. So I hope this information I've just given you has helped you kind of work out where the golden mean, as Aristotle would say, is, or where the balance is between, you know, too much and not enough. And with this knowledge, you will hopefully be able to stop ending conversations too early or ending them too late and all that stuff. And as a result, you will have higher quality conversations, more conversations, and in those conversations, you will connect with people better. So I hope this helped. Have a great day. Oh, also, I do have some other videos if you want confidence, for example, because some of this stuff requires a bit of confidence, so that's over there. Have a great day.